What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. All right, so before I get into this video, I want to give a shout out to the brother Timothy Tate for the donation to the channel via the PayPal. And he had a question. And his question was, do I think that the Kings would have won it all if Chris Webber did not get hurt in the 2003 playoff series against the Dallas Mavericks? Now, a lot of times when we talk about that Kings team, the what if is what if game 6 wasn't rigged? That's generally the main thing people bring up. But I'm glad you brought this up because when you really look at it, the Kings in an alternate reality, right? The Kings could have won back-to-back titles. Now, I'm not going to focus on 2002. I want to focus on 2003. But before that, let's give a little bit of a history on this. Like in the 90s, of course, when you think of the Sacramento Kings, well, hell, let's go before that. Let's talk about when they used to be the Rochester Royals, when the NBA first commenced in the late 40s. The Rochester Royals won a championship in 1951. And I mean, when you talk about the Rochester Royals, you talk about the days of Bob Davies and whatnot, right? But then they moved to Cincinnati. And then when you think of the Cincinnati Royals, you think of Oscar Robertson and Mr. Triple Double, even though they didn't use that term back then. And, he was kind of like a one-man wrecking crew. He never really had a team optimal around him to win a championship. I think the best teammate he ever had was probably Jack Twyman, who wasn't even really in his prime anymore, in the heart of the Oscar Robertson era. Oscar Robertson ultimately won a championship with Milwaukee and Kareem. Then you go to the 70s and you think of Nate Archibald when they moved to the Kansas City Omaha Kings during the 1970s. And then, of course, in the 80s, that's when they moved to Sacramento, where they are now. But in the 90s, you think of Mitch Richmond, who originally was with Run TMC with Golden State, but during the years when he was with the Sacramento Kings, Mitch Richmond was one of the highest scoring guards in the NBA, usually averaged between 22 and 25 points a night, but they were an awful team. And then came that trade in May of 1998 when Mitch Richmond was traded to the then Washington Wizards, the first year they became the Wizards after so many years being the Bullets, in exchange essentially for Chris Webber, right? And I remember at that time thinking, man, this is a terrible trade for the Wizards because you're getting Mitch Richmond, who can still score at that time, but you get a sense he might be toward the end of his career. And don't you know, just as they get him, he's losing a step. Whereas Chris Webber was just entering his prime years. His first full year at least, with the Sacramento Kings, they went 27-23 during that 50-game lockout season. If I remember correctly, I think Chris Webber led the league in rebounding that year. His first full season, as far as 82 games played, 99-2000, they went 44-38. In 2000-2001, they went 55-27. The breakout year was 2001-2002 when they won a franchise record 61 ball games, and of course took the Lakers to 7 games in the, I believe, Western Conference Finals. Many of us think that Game 6, there was a lot of cahootinizing going on between the front office and the refs. But let's focus on 2002-2003 because it's another year where we have a big what if. And the what if is, of course, what happens if Chris Webber didn't get hurt? Now, that year, they were dealing with a rash of injuries. I think only 2 players in the starting lineup played 80 games that year for the Sacramento Kings. Webber, I think, missed like 10 or 15 games himself due to injury, but they still won 59 ball games. And the Lakers, who had been so dominant at the beginning of that decade, well, there was some fraying going on. They started having injuries themselves. Shaq was starting to wear down a little bit. The wear and tear was starting to show. The feud between Shaq and Kobe was causing some issues with the team as far as cohesiveness. And you just thought that they were also getting a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for? It's just natural for a team that's won so many championships in a row to lose some of their focus. So that year, in the first round, the Sacramento Kings knocked out the Utah Jazz in the first round, right? And that effectively ended the Karl Malone, John Stockton duo. John Stockton immediately retired afterwards, and Karl Malone went on to his ill-fated stint with the Lakers. It was the next series against the Mavericks when everything went wrong. The Kings won game one. The Mavericks were on their way to a decisive game two victory when Chris Webber suffered a non-contact injury, a knee injury, I believe it was. And while he was able to come back from that injury, he was never the same player. He was never able to be as explosive or as dominant afterwards. What do I think would have happened if he stayed healthy? Considering the fact that the year before that, the Kings knocked out the Mavericks in 5 games. And considering that you could argue that the Kings had a hell of a lot of drive and animosity based upon how they felt they were wrong in 2002. And they had a singular focus, even if they weren't able to play the Lakers straight up. They wanted to prove they were a championship caliber team. Considering also the fact that even without Chris Webber, the Kings went 7 games with a Mavs team in which they didn't have Chris Webber to contribute after game 2. I sort of lean toward the Kings winning this series, this semifinal series, if they had a healthy Chris Webber. The question is, would they have won the Western Conference Finals against the Spurs, who themselves dispatched of the Lakers in the semifinals? I think when you look at the depth of the Kings, which is their strong suit, when you look at the depth of the team, the versatility, their offensive firepower, and if they were able to control the tempo of this series of the Spurs was more of a slow down, grind you down, pitch it to the paint to Tim Duncan, double him, kick it out to shooters if he can't get something going. They wanted to slow it down. If the pace was more slowed down in that series, it favors the Spurs. If it was more of a high-powered, high-octane type affair, it favors the Kings. But the thing about it, the Kings were also a really good defensive team like the Spurs. And I think that Spurs team was probably the weakest of the championship teams. Although you could argue Duncan was weaker in 2007, but overall, with 2007, you had ingrained and developed Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker. If I remember in 2003, I think Tony was 19 in 2003. So David Robinson was on his last legs. I tend to think Chris Webber has a great series against the Spurs. I think he has a great series against the Spurs, and I think they win in 6 or 7. I think the Kings win in 6, 7. And if they beat the Spurs, that's a wrap. Because the Kings are going to absolutely annihilate the Nets in the finals. I mean, annihilate them. Remember, the Spurs beat the Nets in real life in 6 games. I think the Kings sweep them. And I think, honestly, every game is pretty much a blowout. At least 3 out of 4 games is a blowout. I think maybe game 3 might be a little closer, maybe a 9-point Kings win. But games 1, games 2, and games 4 are blowouts. Games 4, the Kings just going to lower the boom on their ass. They just don't have enough firepower, the Nets. And I think, yeah, I do believe that if Chris Webber didn't get hurt, that the Kings would have won the championship that year. I do. The biggest challenge to them would have been the Spurs. And I think they would have beaten the Spurs. But, you know, that's just my opinion. Tell me what you guys think.